Formula One just created a problem so dangerous, drivers are losing up to 50 kilometers per hour, in the middle of a straight, with the throttle fully pressed. No warning. No brake lights. Just sudden deceleration, at over 300 kilometers per hour. And it already almost caused a major crash. Max Verstappen called it not real Formula One. Lewis Hamilton said fans won't even understand what's happening. And multiple drivers are now demanding urgent changes before it gets worse. Because this isn't just about performance. This is about control disappearing. This is about drivers becoming passengers. And what you're about to hear explains exactly why the 2026 rules might be the biggest mistake Formula One has made in decades. Subscribe now, because the truth behind this only gets more serious from here. At first, the teams thought this was just another adjustment phase. Every new regulation comes with complaints. Every new car feels strange in the beginning. But this time, something didn't add up. Because the data was too extreme to ignore. On long straights, the same car, in the same lap, was showing a speed difference of over 40 kilometers per hour. Not between two drivers. Not between two teams. The same car. That had never happened before. And this is where the illusion started to break. Because Formula One has always been about consistency. If you go flat out, the car responds. If you push harder, you go faster. Simple. Predictable. But now, that relationship is broken. And drivers feel it instantly. They exit a corner perfectly. Full throttle. Everything feels right. And then, the car just stops delivering. Not gradually. Not smoothly. Abruptly. Like something is holding it back. And here's the part most people missed. This isn't just happening at the end of straights. It's happening before braking zones. Which creates something even more dangerous. Drivers are lifting off the throttle earlier than ever before. Not because they want to. Because they have to recharge the battery. To avoid the sudden drop later. So now you have Formula One drivers intentionally slowing down, in places where they used to attack. And that changes racing at its core. Because when drivers stop pushing, the entire rhythm of the sport collapses. But that's not even the biggest issue. The real problem appears when two cars are fighting. Because energy levels are never identical. One driver might have a full battery. The other, almost empty. Which means one car behaves normally. And the other becomes unpredictable. And that creates a gap that shouldn't exist. A hidden weakness. A sudden vulnerability. And in Formula One, that kind of difference doesn't just affect overtakes. It creates risk. Because the closing speed becomes massive. Unnatural. Difficult to judge. And impossible to react to perfectly. This is exactly what drivers have been warning about from day one. But at the beginning, it sounded like frustration. Now, it sounds like a pattern. And the deeper teams looked into it, the more uncomfortable the truth became. Because this isn't a setup issue. It's not something you fix with adjustments. It's built into the system itself. Into the philosophy of the 2026 rules. A system that demands more electric power. Without giving the car the capacity to sustain it. Which leads to one unavoidable outcome. Energy runs out. And when it does, the car changes behavior completely. And this is where another question starts to emerge. If the car behaves differently depending on energy, then what exactly are drivers controlling? Speed? Or just managing limitations? Because if performance depends more on battery state than driver input, then the sport is shifting into something else. Something more calculated. More artificial. Less instinctive. And that's exactly why the frustration is growing so fast. Because drivers can accept difficult cars. They can accept slower cars. But what they cannot accept is a car that takes control away from them. And that realization is what's fueling everything you're about to see next. But then, something happened that changed everything. Up until that moment, it was still a debate. A technical discussion. Engineers talking. Drivers complaining. But no real consequences. Nothing that forced the sport to react. Until Japan. Because what happened there was exactly what everyone feared. A car ahead suddenly lost speed. Not slightly. Not gradually. A sharp drop. Over 30 kilometers per hour, in seconds. And behind, another car was coming at full pace. Full power. No warning. No time to think. Just instinct. The driver behind had to react immediately. Move offline. Brake hard. Avoid contact by meters. Just meters. And in Formula One, meters at that speed feel like nothing. It didn't end in a crash. But that's not the point. Because it could have. And everyone in the paddock knew it. This wasn't bad luck. This wasn't a rare scenario. This was predictable. It was always going to happen. And that's why the reaction was completely different this time. Carlos Sainz didn't hesitate. He said it clearly. They warned about this. And nobody listened. Think about that for a second. The drivers saw it coming. They explained it. They described the exact situation. And it still happened. That's what makes this moment so important. Because now, the risk is no longer theoretical. It's proven, visible, real. And once something becomes real in Formula One, it cannot be ignored anymore. But here's where it gets even more uncomfortable. Because the incident itself wasn't illegal. No rules were broken. No penalties were given. Everything that happened was within the regulations. Which means the problem isn't the drivers. It's the system. The rules themselves created that situation. And that realization hit hard. Because Formula One has always trusted its regulations to protect the drivers. To create boundaries. To prevent exactly this kind of unpredictability. But now, those same rules are doing the opposite. They are introducing instability. They are creating scenarios that drivers cannot fully control. And when control disappears, confidence disappears with it. And when confidence disappears at 300 kilometers per hour, that's when mistakes happen. That's when accidents happen. That's when things escalate very quickly. And suddenly, the conversation inside the paddock changed tone. No more patience. No more gradual adjustments. Now it was urgency. Immediate action. Because the drivers weren't just asking for improvements anymore. They were demanding solutions. Real ones. Fast ones. And that pressure forced the FIA to respond. Emergency meetings. Technical discussions. Engine manufacturers involved. Everyone trying to find an answer. But the deeper they looked, the more complicated it became. Because every fix creates another problem. Increase energy recovery, and you change performance balance. Reduce power, and you slow the cars down. Adjust aerodynamics, and you affect overtaking. There is no simple solution. And that's what makes this situation so dangerous. Because while they search for the perfect fix, the races continue. The risks remain. And the drivers still have to go out there and push, knowing that at any moment, the car might not respond the way they expect. And this leads to a bigger question. One that goes beyond a single incident. If the system itself is unstable, how many more moments like Japan are waiting to happen? And more importantly, what happens when one of them doesn't end with a near miss? And just when it seemed like things couldn't get more complicated, another layer of the problem started to surface. Because this isn't only happening in races. It's completely changing qualifying. And that might be even worse. Qualifying used to be the purest moment in Formula One. One lap. No traffic. No excuses. Just driver and machine. Pushing to the absolute limit. Finding something extra. Something no one else could. That's where legends were made. That's where the difference between good and exceptional became visible. But now, that moment is disappearing. Because in 2026, the fastest lap isn't about who dares more. It's about who manages energy better. And that changes everything. Drivers are no longer focusing only on braking points, or corner speed, or risk. They are thinking about battery percentage, deployment phases, recovery timing, things that don't feel natural in a qualifying lap. And here's where it gets even more frustrating. You can drive the perfect lap, hit every apex, brake at the limit, commit fully, and still lose time for a reason completely out of your control. Because if the battery drops at the wrong moment, the lap is gone. Instantly. No recovery. No second chance. And drivers know it. Max Verstappen said it in the simplest way possible. Before, you could do something special. Now, that doesn't exist. And that single idea hits harder than anything else. Because Formula One has always rewarded the extraordinary. That one moment of brilliance. That one corner where everything comes together. But now, that moment can be neutralized by a number on a dashboard. And this is where the sport starts to lose something intangible. Something difficult to measure, but impossible to ignore. Emotion. Because when fans watch qualifying, they're not just watching lap times. They're watching risk. They're watching commitment. They're watching drivers dance on the edge of control. But if the result depends more on energy cycles than human input, that connection starts to fade. And the drivers feel it too. Fernando Alonso made it painfully clear. There are situations now where it doesn't matter who is driving. Because the car dictates the outcome. Not the driver. And in a sport built on the idea that the best driver wins, that's a dangerous shift. But here's where things take another turn. Because not everyone is complaining. And that creates tension inside the paddock itself. A small group of drivers are actually comfortable, even positive. And that might sound strange at first. Until you look closer. Because those drivers are in cars that manage energy better, which means they suffer less from super clipping, which means the problem feels smaller from their perspective. And suddenly, the grid is divided. Not by talent, not by strategy, but by how well each car hides the flaw. And that creates something even more complex. Because now, fixing the issue doesn't just affect safety, it affects competitiveness. If the FIA changes the system, some teams gain, others lose. And that makes every decision political, careful, slow. Exactly the opposite of what the situation requires. So now Formula One is trapped in a difficult position. Act quickly, and risk changing the competitive order. Or wait, and risk something worse happening on track. And while this internal battle continues, the drivers keep speaking out. More direct, more frustrated, more united than ever before. Because despite their differences, despite their teams, despite their interests, on this issue, they all agree. Something is wrong, and it needs to be fixed. But the deeper this goes, the clearer one thing becomes. This isn't just a small mistake in the rules. It's a structural problem. Something built into the DNA of the 2026 cars. And that raises a question that nobody inside Formula One wants to answer yet. If the foundation itself is flawed, can it really be fixed during the season? Or is this just the beginning of a much bigger problem?